Welcome to the Dan Clarence Show. Welcome to the Dan Clarence Gomez Show, and I'm your host, Dan Clarence Gomez, and my guest today is Hayden Tee. And we will talk about the Bad Guy, his show in Auckland. Welcome to the show, Mr. Hayden Tee.
Kia ora, John. Thank you for having me. How are you today?
I'm okay. Yes, welcome to my podcast. Before we talk about the Bad Guy, I will tell you about being an actor. How do you start? How do you start in acting career? On acting.
How did I start? I started when I was a teenager, and I had some hip surgery, so I couldn't play sport. So I had to find another extracurricular activity, and acting and singing became that activity. And I kind of fell in love with it. I fell in love with the escapism, and then I realized quite early on that the only thing that would really make me happy in life was to be an actor. So I just put all my focus into that passion.
What is the first musical do you appear? First musical.
The first musical I ever saw was Jesus Christ Superstar at the what was then called the Aotea Centre in Auckland, but it's now been renamed as the Kiritakanawa Theatre, and it was amazing. It blew my mind away. I bought the CD, I bought the T-shirt, I bought all of the merchandise. I went home. I would recreate scenes with my sister, like making her do all the different parts, and I'd play the other parts. And I fell in love with it. And from that moment on, any musical that came to New Zealand while I was growing up, I would go and see. It gave me the bug.
You appear in the Cats musical. What do you experience in the Cats musical? Because I saw that on many news in Wikipedia.
I did Cats in, I think it was 2008 in Seoul, South Korea. I played Bustopher Jones, Gus, the theatre cat, and Growl Tiger, the opera cat. I was only there for a very short period of time. The director of Cats, the person who stages and restages it at the time, Joanne Robinson, I had worked with on about 4 shows previously, and they couldn't find someone to play this role. So she reached out to my agent and asked if I was interested, and I had a break of 6 weeks where I didn't have a show, and she said, please come and just do those 6 weeks and it'll give us more time to find someone. So I went to Korea and did it. I had the most amazing time. It is the most fun to be in Cats. It's because you get all this improvisation. I didn't realize how lovely it is to wear lycra until I did Cats. The costumes are fun. The best thing about it for me was it's such an ensemble effort. Everyone is in that. Everyone is equal in that show. It's a real group team effort.
How about playing musicals in UK and US? What is the experience in working in America and the United Kingdom as an theater actor involved?
I first moved to New York in 2010, I think it was, maybe 2009, 2010. I did, I think, maybe 9 musicals in America, lots of regional theatre. I was lucky enough to do a couple of workshops of new musicals. I was in the original cast of Being Earnest, the musical version of The Importance of Being Earnest, written by Paul Gordon and Jay Gruska. And I had a lovely time in America. The UK, I first went there in 2005. I was performing in Sydney at the Parramatta Riverside Theatre, and I was doing a cabaret show, and similar to the one, similar sort of style to Bad Guy. And there were 5 people in the audience this night, 5 people. And I was so embarrassed because there's not many people. And so few people. And I said to my manager, I can't do the show for 5 people. There's more people on the stage with me in the band than there is in the audience. And he said, you're doing it. And I didn't realize, but in the audience was John Robertson, who was a executive producer and casting director for Cameron McIntosh. And after the show, he came up to me and he said, would you like to audition for Marius on the West End? And I was like, well, oh my gosh, yes, I would. When? And he said, well, we're actually trying to find someone. Can you go there in 5 weeks? So I flew to London, auditioned for Marius in Les Miserables on the West End, got the role, and then moved there about 6 months later to start the show. It was a wonderful time. So that was the first time I worked in London. Then years later, like 10 years later, I went back to Les Mis in London again and played Javert for a little while. And then I went back again to play Miss Trunchbull in Matilda. And they're my 3 times I've been on the West End.
Ang gagalawin niyo, Clarence, ha?
Sige. You returned in Australia in late 2006. How about the experience when you play in the Australian premiere in Sydney of Titanic? What is the experience?
Yes, so funny you should mention Titanic, because the director I was telling you about, Joanne Robertson, who cast me in Cats, was actually, her and her husband were directing and choreographing Titanic. So that was one of the shows that I did with them. I'd already done South Pacific with them in Adelaide, and I was in London doing Marius, as I said, in Les Mis, and they came over to London, they saw Les Mis, and they took me out for a drink, and they said, we want you to come back to Australia to play Thomas Andrews in Titanic. And I was like, I would love to. So I went back and performed in that. I met some of my closest friends in my life on that job. Andy Conahan and Belinda Wollaston, 2 of them I think of straight away. I'm still incredibly close with both of them. And that was the first show that we all did together. It was a very special experience. It unfortunately didn't do very well box office wise. We closed early. We were up against some big musicals. The first ever production of Priscilla had just opened, and that was a big hit. But I tell you what, it was such a wonderful experience. I met some beautiful people, and it's such a beautiful show with a lovely score.
After that, you also appear in the Teddy Tahu Rhodes opera Dead Man Walking and Opera Australia's productions of My Fair Lady. What is that experience about playing about that? Can you tell?
Yes, of course. Teddy is a fellow Kiwi like me from New Zealand, so it was very exciting to work with another New Zealander, especially in a different country in Australia. The role I played, Father Grenville, was a priest, and it's the first time I'd ever done an opera, and actually the only time I've ever done an opera. And it was very different to musical theatre. You have to have all the notes learned before you turn up, and I didn't know that. So I turned up on day 1 without it learned, and I got in trouble. So that was a big lesson to learn. It was quite an intense experience for me, because I don't actually read music, and I found it very stressful. But in the end, once we opened, I relaxed into it, and I had a wonderful time.
You also play in the Cabaret. What is the difference of musical theater and cabaret?
So funny enough, Bad Guy, the show that I'm doing in Auckland on the 18th and 19th of February at the Civic, is a world premiere of this new Cabaret. The real difference for me between cabaret and theatre is that in theatre, you're playing a role. In cabaret, you're playing yourself. For me, cabaret is an art form where the audience should leave feeling they've met the real person rather than a character.
You have a show in February 18 to 19 in Auckland called The Bad Guy. Can you tell us about that show? about
Yes,
the bad guy?
I'd love to. Bad guy, basically, I've always been cast as the villain, as the antagonist, as the bad guy. And all of, for most of my career, I always get Javert, the bad guy, Miss Trunchbull, the bad girl, Edward Rutledge, bad guy, Jigger and Carousel always get cast as the antagonist. And this show is all about exploring some of those characters, having fun with those characters, but it's also about unpacking the reasons why I'm cast as the bad guy. And those reasons are queer coding. Those reasons are the fact that I commit a lot to my acting choices. Like, I'm quite bold, maybe not as subtle as a protagonist would normally be more of a subtle character. I tend to paint with broad strokes. So the show is really examining why I get cast like that, but also examining why society feels the desire and the need to have a bad guy at all. Are there really, obviously there are bad people out there, but I think maybe good and bad is less of a fact thing and more of a perspective thing. Potentially good could just be something you prefer, and bad is something you don't prefer, and that it really is just a matter of perspective.
You also appeared in the musical called South Pacific. I really love that musical. I really love the song in South Pacific musical.
Yeah, South Pacific was lovely. It was one of the first lead roles I ever played, Joe Cable, in Adelaide. It was the first show I did with that director-choreographer team that I mentioned, Joanne Robinson and her husband, John Dietrich. I adore them both. I worked with them on 6 shows over the years, and that was our first. It was interesting because I auditioned for it in Sydney, and it got down to 2 of us. It got down to another guy and myself, and the casting director actually told them not to cast me because they'd be a laughingstock because I'm an openly gay man playing a straight role. But then they cast the other guy, and then when it went to Adelaide, they called me up and said, "We made the wrong decision. Would you come and do it?" And I did, and I took great pleasure in being able to prove that casting director wrong.
When you are in New York, you release your first CD called Cabaret Hotline. Can you tell about that CD? The first CD.
Yeah, my first album is
Cabaret Hotline. The first CD.
Yeah, my first CD was self-titled, called Hayden Tee. We recorded it in Sydney and then released it when we were in New York. Nigel O'Brien arranged it, and it really is a traditional cabaret CD. It's songs that were in my cabaret show at the time and are very personal, very much speak to me as a person as opposed to characters. And the arrangements are very much cabaret arrangements. They're reworkings. And that was the first of 3 albums.
We have no time now. Before we end, can you tell to all our listeners in New Zealand to watch The Bad Guy in February 18 to February 19? Can you invite them? Can you tell?
Yes, everyone in New Zealand, please come along to Bad Guy on February 18th and 19th. That is Friday at 6:15 and Saturday at 7:30. It's in the Civic Winter Garden. You can book at aucklandlive.com/Bad Guy, or you can just type in Hayden Tee Bad Guy into Google and it will come up at Auckland Live. I'd love to see you there. It's all very safe. Auckland Live are giving amazing socially distanced tables with individual waiters and QR codes because we're in the red light. And it's basically, it's one of only 2 shows going ahead in the Pride Festival. So we'd love to see all of New Zealand there.
Thank you for guesting to my podcast and have a good day. Bye.
Thank you. Ka kite.